Welcome to Make the Game. I'm Matt Hackett. Thanks so much for being here. Today we're talking with Chuy, a multi-talented podcaster and content creator who is making his very first video game. Let's jump in.
You're listening to Make the Game with Matt Hackett.
All right, well let's jump into this. So, welcome, Chuy. It's good to have you. I'm sure my audience would love to hear a little bit about you and get to know you.
So I am Chewy, often called ChuyPlays around the online spheres that I'm in. Do a lot of different content creation, just a bunch of different things, videos, articles, podcasts, anything that's like content oriented. I'm interested in it and want to make it, and I think that's always why I feel like I get nothing done because I got too many ideas and there's not enough time to get to them all. So, yeah.
Boy, can I relate to that. Yes. Um, and on that note, you are now also interested in making your own video game to add to
Yes.
that pile of like a brand new content category. And it's a doozy, right? It is not a simple one.
Yeah,
It is like it's
it's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and just have increasingly wanted to do, and it's to
mm,
the point where I'm like, all right, let's step back everywhere else and just focus on one thing for a bit. And I picked something that applies a lot of different things, so hopefully that keeps me entertained and interested enough to keep it going.
yes, I think it will. I mean, you've got such a history with games, your popular Animal Crossing podcast, like, I think the game dev bug was going to bite you eventually. Right?
Hmm.
It was inevitable.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that I can be really helpful here because you've never made a game before, right?
Yeah.
You're interested in making one yourself, and boy, do I have a book for that. How to-
I also have a book for that.
Yes. That's actually how we met. Is you wrote a little blurb on the book in Patch Magazine, which I have. I own a copy of it now. It makes me so happy,
Hmm.
and that's really cool. So I think it's very appropriate that we kind of cover the book and we sort of walk through the chapters and how they can help you, make your vision a reality, right? Bring your game into the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I was really excited after we had first spoken all that time ago, just for like the Patch Magazine interview and everything. Because
Hmm.
afterwards, I left that and I was just like, maybe I should make a game. Maybe that's where I need to be. And so, yeah, it's been on my mind ever since that first conversation.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's and we'll get to that in chapter two, but the itch is there. It seems really itchy for you, right? Like you've
Hmm.
got you've got itches you want to scratch. Um, so this is pretty ad hoc. We're just going to work our way through the book, and you've written some great notes. So you went through chapter one. You are a producer, and you made some notes about things that you liked, and also some questions that came up. And I love these action items. You made a list of things
Hmm.
that you want to do after reading chapter one. Um, I love that, like some takeaways, right?
Yeah.
So let's go through that. Let's go through this great document you've made. I love that you start with one of my. I mean, anyone who listens to me talk for more than 5 minutes is probably going to hear me talking about Derek Yu. And one of my favorite quotes is the one that you have here, which is, "I don't believe that there's a right way to make games."
Hmm.
Derek Yu, and it's completely true, right? And I mean, it says that in the beginning of the book, which is then going to tell you how to make games. But like the point being that like nobody really knows what they're talking about, right? And I think that aligns with um your kind of principles because you have experience with like improv, which is very relevant, right? Like there's no right way to improv. In fact, some of the weirdest stuff might get you some of the best results, right?
Yeah, and that this instantly stuck with me because I think there's like always a focus on like people want to make a right decision. People want to do the right thing for the most part,
Mm,
you could say. And I've been doing improv for a while now, and I think the biggest thing that I've gotten out of that is there's like just a million right ways to do things. Like
mm,
just there's a lot fewer wrong ways to do things than there are right ways. And I don't know. I like to explore that. I like to just like experiment with that. And I mean, obviously, a lot of things, a lot of decisions you make may lead to failure, starting over or something. But like,
Hmm.
I don't know what you did. You'll find some right solution that works for you, and other people will find a right solution that works for them. So I'm a lot less scared of like the failure aspect of things, and more like, let's just try this out. Let's see what happens if I do this. So
Yes.
so
Love
yeah,
that.
I feel like that quote specifically would just like hit that for me, where I'm like, yeah, there's so many ways to do things. Just pick one, try it out, see what happens.
Exactly. Yeah. Throw it against the wall, see what sticks.
Hmm.
Um, Another note you have in here is one of the sub chapters, chapter one, which is all by yourself, but not really. And I think it's important to give credit to people who help us, right? Like,
Hmm.
my wife doesn't actively help me on my games. She doesn't, write code or fix bugs or make sprites or anything, but she offers a lot of she offers feedback, she offers moral support. She'll listen to me rant for like an hour, and that itself is a gift sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you got a note in here and how on how that resonates with you as well. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh, I think this is like a really like philosophical slash cultural kind of thing for me, this concept. I remember years back working my first job out of college, right? The first thing that's going like kind of career oriented. And there was somebody else in like a similar boat as me. They had just like moved out of their place, moved several states, and were working there as a graphic designer and that sort of thing. And I remember like the concept of like self-made came up, and I was just like, I really don't believe that's the case. Like to me, self-made is not something that fundamentally exists, just because there's so many people and events and actions that got us to wherever we are at this point. And so many of those things, without them, you couldn't be doing what you're doing. And my
absolutely.
example to him at the time was just like, we're driving right now down this
Mm,
road that was funded by a bunch of different people through some tax dollars, and everything was built by a bunch of different people through their job and that sort of thing. And
yes,
that's how people get to a business, to spend money and get them, whatever riches they're getting from that. So I don't know.
exactly.
There's just like, I don't want to be a person who like forgets that aspect, and is always appreciative of like just the work that goes into just putting you into the position to start something like this in the first place.
I love that. Yeah, exactly right. Relevant quote for again from the first chapter is, "If I have seen a little further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Sir Isaac Newton.
Hmm.
As another chapter or a quote in there as well, but I'll leave that to the reader. But yeah, I love that. Like, solo dev, right? That's a thing these days. But like, you know, I benefit from my network helps me all the time. My community, I will be making my game in the open, right? And they will be helping out. So like,
Hmm.
I'm doing the heavy lifting, but like, yeah, nobody works alone. We all benefit from society and all kinds of other things. Um, at the end of here also you have utilize available resources, which I think is a really big all the educational content that I'm making is a big one on that, right? Where you know the things you have at your fingertips are the first place you should look for the building blocks of your game, whether it's the
Hmm.
actual software or you know like you're a guitar player, like
Hmm.
you've got a guitar in your hands sometimes, like what a great, like, use that resource, why not, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, guitar is a funny thing too, because I'm like, I used to think like I didn't take lessons or anything, kind of taught myself per se. But now that I think of it, I'm like, no, I was on the internet looking at tabs that people posted and learned from those eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Learned. So, like, just because nobody told me so directly how to play, or what I guess chord combinations made a song, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean it didn't happen. So,
Exactly.
mhm,
Yeah, that's a great segue into the hats, which is something chapter one talks about. So all the different hats you can wear to make a game: artist, composer, programmer, animator, sound designer, level designer. And it's
Hmm.
sounding like I think as a solo dev, like the temptation is to wear every single hat, right? But those hats
Yeah.
can become pretty heavy, and before you know it, you're like compiling your own version of Linux and building a computer from scratch, and you're not even working on your game. Like you don't want to go too low level and do everything, right? But it definitely sounds like you have some hats that you want to wear for sure. I like that you went through and you listed out a lot of these hats, and you mentioned your personal like kind of confidence or experience level each of them. And this is really useful for me because I was really curious about this um, because I know that you're very capable, like at the things I've seen you make, like podcasts,
Hmm.
and your writing, and the journalistic stuff is really impressive. But I don't know what exactly you've made art wise. I'd love to see um, what you've made there. So let's go down the list. You've got artist, semi confident. I love that. Some confidence. That's all you need to be an artist.
Yeah, semi confidence because it's something that I'm definitely out of practice on.
Mm.
But literally growing up, every elective that I could take tended to be art class. I was in every art class
Mm.
that I could take through junior high and high school. I think my electives in junior high were like typing and art. That was it.
Love it. Oh, life skills. You use
Uh-huh.
typing forever. Yeah,
Yeah, I type every day, all day.
absolutely. Yes.
And then high school, it was all art classes. I think I took like AV once where I was just like making
Hmm.
videos and stuff. But I'm like, that's the same thing to me. That's art.
Yeah.
So yeah, semi-confident there. And I guess in some ways, like I've kept it going, like through like video creation and
Hmm.
just writing little things here and there, and even playing music, like there's some artistic I guess experience that goes into that. But as far as like creating little sprites and things, I'm like, oh, I haven't done that in years of like I
Mm.
remember just making my own Pokemon cards or Digimon cards as a kid, where I was like, I want to make my own card
Oh,
game. And
cool.
so I'd cut out like little pieces of paper into as close of a rectangular shape as possible, and then glue them all together so they're as thick as possible too,
Oh, that's great.
and draw on those for hours and be like, I, I don't know. I never got past the drawing phase, like the actual like game design phase.
Oh, that's the hard part. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the real work. You just want to do the fun part. I totally get that.
Uh-huh.
Card creation. That's great. Semi-confident artist. I love that. Composer, confident. I love this. I know that you play guitar.
Hmm.
And so I guess you've made compositions in the past, and then that's something
Yeah.
you want to do. You want to be making the music for your game?
This I think is one of the biggest itches that I have
Oh.
as far as like game development goes.
Hmm.
I've we've talked about before everybody has heard, like just on our own, kind of my ideas. But one of my big ideas is definitely like a music-based game, and I
Mm.
just have such a desire to kind of make up a bunch of different little bands for that and
Oh,
explore like
fun.
what genre of music does this band play, and just really explore a lot of different things with that. So yeah, as far as music goes, I've got pretty eclectic tastes. Lots of different things really interest me in
Mm.
music. So yeah, just a lot there. And
Okay.
it has been a while since I've like played in a band and written things, but I'm slowly getting back into it. Been doing some little writing exercises the past week or so. So it's been nice.
Oh, I just love that. I love that you've got experience. Sounds like significant experience too. I mean, I've never been in a band. Like I played some guitar and some keys, but that's a big deal. And I love that you have this deep well with which you can pull. Um, Before we move on to the other things like programming and animation and stuff, I was just real quick. Are you picture? This is a pretty important one, and I talk about in the book how there's a so we're talking about 2D versus 3D, right? And
Hmm.
and there's like the lines blur a lot. Like you can actually have a 3D game with 2D elements and vice versa. But I'm curious what you're picturing in your head.
I guess it depends on which one I'm looking at.
Mhm.
As far as like the music one goes, I kind of picture um, a map. I picture a little map that
Mm-hmm.
has a bunch of like different buildings or places that you can go to. So kind of like an overworld map. I guess how would you define that? Like kind of 2D
Mm-hmm.
a bit? kind of top down 2D perspective.
Yeah. That's where the lines blur, right? Like
Yeah.
I've played plenty of games with those kinds of maps where it's really 3D. And you can even have that like the 3D map with the 2D billboards laid on top of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's always a million ways to do it.
Yeah. And then for the other two, I've pictured more 2D, I think. Well, one 2D, one more 3D actually.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, well, let's keep through the hats, but then I'm really curious to get to these game concepts you've mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, that's yeah, I can't wait to get to those. If you're ready to talk about them, I know sometimes like I get a little, protective of my game concepts sometimes. So, feel free to talk about what you want to and not, leave some things a mystery if you'd like to.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Programming is a really interesting one. No experience, animation, no experience, level designer, no experience. Sound
Hmm.
engineer, some confidence makes total sense because you've got a music background. I think for programming, I'm curious, because I think there's a spectrum. There's either you've been interested in programming and you're anxious to learn it, or you're more like, I don't want to learn it, I want to avoid it. And there's options for you, right? You can use, like Unreal Engine has blueprints, Unity has several different options,
Hmm.
where you can just drag and drop nodes. Like it's all visual scripting. Right. And so I'm curious, do you have any ideas yet for what you think you might like, or are you just gonna try out the engine and see what clicks? What do you think?
I think, as far as my relationship with programming, I wouldn't say I am against it. I'm actually like pretty interested in programming and that sort of thing. But I'd say it's definitely intimidating, you know.
Yes.
I do know like HTML
Hmm.
stuff, like some little code, uh, just for, different work things that I've done in the past. But
Hmm.
outside of that, it's not something that I have a whole lot of experience with. I don't know any really in-depth gaming coding languages or anything, but it isn't something that like scares me. I kind of like the logic puzzles that I think it creates for a lot of people. Those
Nice.
types of things I like messing with. And maybe that's just like the game thing. Like I like where I'm like, oh, if I press this button, what happens, or what
Mm.
what is the output to my input here? So
Yes.
those questions have always been ones that keep me interested, I think.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. It sounds like you're prepared and up to the challenge. That's fantastic. So do you want to get into your game concepts? It sounds like you've got three. Do you want to lay them all out, or do you want to focus on the one that you're most likely to build, or what do you want to do?
I think with this, there's one that I'm definitely feeling like is the place to start. And we
Mm.
talked about this one earlier. And I feel
Hmm.
totally fine sharing this one because I do feel like there's a game out there that already kind of does this. A
Hmm.
friend shared it with me maybe a year or so ago. I forget what the game was. It was a mobile game, but I call this one my game, at least. I call it Birdhouse. That's just kind of the
Project
generic
name.
name I've
Hmm.
I've landed on for now. But the basic concept is I wanted a game that's focused on like learning about birds and making little bird friends. So definitely
No.
one of a cozy game, you could say, a wholesome game. But the gameplay loop I thought of was like, all right, plant trees, build bird houses that go in those trees, attract the little bird friends to live by in your backyard, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I think of it as kind of like a resource collector, a little bit of a decorator type of game.
Hmm.
But funny enough, I was going over the concept with my partner yesterday, and she came up with some like really cool ideas for it that
Mm.
would go toward the educational aspect. Like, I'm thinking there'll be like a little bit of a clock, like you end your day, and it's like, let's see if a bird shows up in the morning. But
Mm.
she really pinpointed like the I like sad things.
Hmm.
I'm a person who really likes to watch a movie and cry or get real emotional by the end of it.
Hmm.
And she was like just spitballing ideas, and she's like, what if at the end of the day in the game, there's a little mini game that plays, and it's like you have to turn off all the lights and everything. And then it gives you a little fact about like how light pollution leads to like bird deaths and kinds of things. So like a little sad fact, she took it further and was like, and then like maybe in the morning after you've like turned off, it's just like a little, I guess she pictured it as like a touch screen type of game where you're just like tapping the lights off to click them all out. And
Mm.
then she was like, and in the morning you still find like a little dead bird on your yard that, and you just get a little note that, even if you try, some accidents still happen.
Yes. Oh, that's
um,
well, that's life, right? I like that. Work a little melancholy in there, right? A little
mhm,
some minor chords here and there. And I think that like that doesn't have to be depressing or morbid or sad, really,
mhm.
right? Recently rewatched Beetlejuice. I don't know if you've
Oh,
seen it. It's a Tim Burton classic. It's old. I'm showing my age here, but it's a game that has like this is actually a game of sorry, game a movie. This is a movie about death. And it's spoiler like characters die pretty early on, and it's very that part of it's very sad, but it's also kind of like an optimistic movie. Like it's Hollywood, so it's got a happy ending, and like
mhm.
even though death is weaved throughout the whole thing, it's full of life and energy and love. You know what I mean? Anyway,
Yeah.
that's kind of my maybe a pretentious tangent there or something, but I love the little. I think pieces of artwork need that. Otherwise, they lack a little humanity. Like I get that I'm not knocking children's cartoons, and children's cartoons would probably not have some of those themes in it. But when I see like a screenshot of like a something intended for 6 year olds, it's just shiny and bright, and there's never any worries. That worst thing that happened was I don't know, dropped my sandwich or ice cream or something. And they
Mhm.
lack a little bit. Like I need a little bit of that humanity, a little bit of darkness, just like just a little bit of minor chord. Anyway, I love that. I think that you can totally bake those elements into even like a really happy, cozy game about birds. So I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, because I mean, ultimately, I'm just like I have grown more interested in birds and have, especially like just around my neighborhood and stuff. I'm like, oh, these are the types of birds that live here in this part of the world and everything, and just like
Oh, I love
learning
that.
about those specifics and stuff. So it, I'd like that applied to the game in some way, and
That's great. Yeah,
yeah,
you and I have that
make
in
it
common.
partly educational, but also pretty dang cute.
So are you picturing like maybe real bird facts when you say educational?
Yeah, I think so. Or
That's I
at
like
least
that a lot.
like some stuff that's like building a little bit more of an awareness of like the effect we have on wildlife around us
Mm-hmm.
and the environment around us.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, partly real educational, but also kind of cute because I also have ideas of like, what if you could get a phoenix to live in a bird cage too, or a little birdhouse in your backyard. I'm
Cool.
like, oh, what if there's like cool mythical birds, and maybe that's like, I guess the twist there would be like, here's an educational thing of like these myths and where they came from and the
Oh
culture
yeah.
surrounded around that too. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
love
I don't
oh,
know.
that's great. Yeah, that could be end game stuff, right? You could you build work your way up to it. I can just picture the trailer where you start off with cute birds and by the end you get that quick montage of like, phoenix and a cockatrice and a rock,
Uh,
an ROC, those giant birds, like whatever mythology bird.
yeah,
I
or
love
even
that.
something ancient like a pterodactyl or
Oh,
something.
cool. Oh, I love it. That's great.
Hmm.
Okay, so Birdhouse. I love like you had some other game pitches which were more ambitious but also very cool. Birdhouse sounds like a great place to start because like when I think about a game concept, you could have a playground, like a little sandbox for your game set up in just a few hours, even as a first
Hmm.
timer. You literally need just like a little space and a little character to walk around, and then like
That's
step two would
amazing.
be like you have a birdhouse and boop, and then you can like pick it up and move it around. And then like you know what I mean? Like you've got that nice incremental, like pretty early on, you can have, yard, person, and bird. And that's not
Hmm.
enough. That's not what you're talking about with your game concept, but that is a start. Like you've got the elements right there.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
already so much further than I thought. You know,
exactly.
when thinking about this initially, I was like, how could I ever even get to that? you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's no like some of the other ideas have like the rhythm based and that would be kind of hanging over your head as like some kind of difficult technology you're going to have to work into your game. And so even when you get that, you've got your yard, you got your person, you got your bird, that wouldn't be enough. You'd still be like, oh, this game still needs more. And so I like that with this birdhouse concept. It's not like it's not weighted down with much, right? It's kind of a light,
Hmm.
free concept. So I think
Yeah.
it's very doable for you.
And I do think like I really resonated with the concept of like little mini games at the end of the day,
Hmm.
because I was like, oh, I feel like that's like an opportunity to play with some of the different gameplay elements that may make a bigger appearance in some of like future games, because obviously I think
Mm,
I'm just going to keep having game ideas from here on out.
you will. It
So
will
like
only get
even with
worse.
that one, the interest in birds for me really like came up from we had some parakeets for a
Mm.
while that have since passed, unfortunately, but
Oh, I'm
we
sorry.
had some great friendships with them. But they really loved whenever I just like pulled out my guitar and played music for them and stuff. I'm like,
Oh,
oh, what if there's like just a little rhythm mini game as a transition,
I love
Um,
that.
so yeah, I feel like there's an opportunity to play with some other concepts that I want to explore with that.
That's great. And I love that because it's what I call a maybe later or even a could never.
Hmm.
It's those are great ideas for like you could make your whole game and you could ship it. And then you could be like, oh, I could add now in this nice isolated way that won't interrupt anything else about the game is this little like game mini game with music or
Hmm.
something. That would be a really great kind of sandbox for you to play around in too, to work towards your more ambitious rhythm based games.
Yeah.
Like yeah, as you mentioned, it gives you an area to practice, right?
Hmm.
So, um, what hats are needed for my games? A question you've got here, and that's a really interesting one. So it sounds like you would be handling the art. You got your art hat on.
Hmm.
Definitely composing. You'd make your own music. You'd be doing the programming, which you're up to. um, Knowing that you're a first timer and like being forgiving with yourself and also like if let's say the code you're working with it and after a while it just doesn't click, I think it's totally something you probably should do down the road is try out like a visual scripting thing. But if the programming's clicking to you and you're like this is making total sense, I'm finding this interesting and exciting, then yeah, just
Hmm.
continue down that path, right? um Animator is interesting because I think like something I'm doing with my own games is I'm kind of putting up a wall with animation. Um, I'm seriously considering just not animating almost anything for my next game. Like
Oh.
the your default character that you play as, your avatar is a doll composed of different pieces. Like you can change your hat and stuff like that. And because of that, I don't see a way for me to make the art for different perspectives, like facing left or up or down or anything. Also, animating is hard, and like I've got
Yeah.
critters in my game. Like I've got a rabbit that moves around, and I'm just like squishing it. I'm just using tweening animations to like whoop whoop, like to make it look like it's moving, but I didn't put the work in to do the extra art. So, animation is on the chopping block to me. The only thing I've added to my current game is like fire animation and a few other things. But, um, I mentioned this because here you have animator no experience, and I think also animation is one of those things that's incredibly expensive, right? Because
Hmm.
like I was working on a game where one character had maybe 40 sprites.
Mm.
That's an incredible increase in uh, your content pipeline's demand, right? Because with my game right now, the having just the one sprite, I can fly, right? I can crank out content. But if I had to make 40
For
sprites,
every single one, that's a
come
lot.
on. Yeah, I am one person here. Like that would be awesome. If you're uh working on Cuphead or something, like that's their whole thing is they need hundreds of awesome frames, but I do not need it. I just need good gameplay. So thought I'd mention that is and I think especially animation can be seen as like a optimization step. So you might
Hmm.
not ever need it. So that's a hat I would like keep on your hat rack until
Yeah.
later on, and then can even just consider it. Like I wouldn't call it a must. There's other ways to kind of dodge having to do a lot of um, animating by hand.
Hmm.
And I like your idea too with Birdhouse because under level designer, like, there's you might only really have to build out just like a house and a yard, and you could even model that from your own past experiences and stuff. So there wouldn't be, there's not a lot of demand on you for that hat. So I think that's a hat you'll be able to wear with confidence and have a lot of fun. Just
Yeah.
building your little house and your little yard and a little place for your birds. So that's
Hmm.
exciting. Yeah, I'm not worried about your hats. I think because you already, as you mentioned, you already have a lot of interests, right? Podcaster, musician, journalist. I think
Too
that
many interests.
yeah, exactly right. So I think that your hats, yeah, I think you're gonna have a great time wearing your hats. So let's um let's talk about the action items from chapter one. So we got become a producer, define your game, learn your roles, gather the resources. I love this.
Hmm.
Um,
It's
yeah.
funny I've been looking at the become a producer one this whole time, and I'm just like, I'm gonna change that to just be a
Hmm.
producer.
Be a producer. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. Producer is an interesting one to me. It's like, I am a game producer, but I've never had like a paid game producer role, right? Like at a
Hmm.
studio or something. But the production stuff is really interesting because it's really just like you're the glue, you're the facilitator, you're the one who insists things get done. Like when you're working with other people, you're kind of like walking around and sending a lot of emails and poking people. Hey, how's that going? You're like you're making things happen. I think with producer for a solo developer, you're doing some of that, but you're poking yourself, right? You're like, hey, you need to like I need to finish this art asset or I got to write this code or something. Um,
Yeah.
but to me, it's more of a mindset than anything else. It's like just a reminder that no one else is gonna make the game for you, so you've got to be the one who pushes it forward. Um, Number two, define your game. I think you've defined it well. You know where you want to start, and I think what I like about your birdhouse concept is I think that it's easy to picture how it would begin, as we talked about, just like a simple here's a little yard and whatever. But you can also like you've got end game ideas. Like I can totally have a picture in my head of a really lush house with a bunch of trees and birds flying around everywhere and sound effects and maybe a phoenix flies overhead. I can totally see your end game, and so I like that you've got kind of your bookends for your concept. I think some concepts sometimes people have them and they don't have strong bookends. It'll be more of a start. Like that's some of my concepts have that weakness where it's a strong start. I'm like, okay, good, that sounds interesting, but where's the loop? Where's it come back home? Or what's the ending? Like what's the
Hmm.
obvious ending or end state or something? So I like that for your concept here. Um, Learn my roles and gather the resources. These are interesting ones. Roles are a lot related to wearing your hats. Gather your resources will be an interesting one because I think for you we'll get to pick a game engine. That's your first boss battle in chapter four.
Yeah.
But I think you have other software too. Like I think that you need to find a DAW, a digital audio workstation, or have you decided on Audacity? Where are you with that?
Um, I guess I've always done like a little bit of an in between like Audacity and GarageBand. Like
Okay,
I'll kind of share between those two, but I'm always open to more as well.
got it. Yeah, I think GarageBand's a great place to start. The last time I got into music, I was using GarageBand on iPad, and that was lacking some features like a master track. So I moved to GarageBand on OS X, and that was lacking some features like more detailed mastering. So that I moved to Reaper. But I like the strategy of starting with the free stuff and only moving up if you have to, like when you hit
Hmm.
a roadblock.
Yeah, I think that's a good content creator experience thing that came from me where I'm like, just work with what you got for now and then, upgrade when you feel you've outgrown whatever you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Um, so under gather the resources as well, something I always recommend is just to start downloading assets. I don't know if you have like you probably have some libraries you use for your own stuff, like your podcast and your other content.
Hmm.
What I like to do is I have like a folder specifically just for game assets. And at this point, it's ridiculous. I have so much stuff bookmarked and downloaded and whatever. But I've got a million resources. Let me know if you'd like me to link you to stuff. But I would highly suggest just go download. Like you can find them for free, or you can pay a little bit of money, honestly, to get a ton of audio files and assets, like 2D, 3D, whatever you need. And
Hmm.
I think it's great to just start downloading, just go nuts, right? Um, because there's no like, especially if it's free, there's no downside, and a lot of it can be really inspiring. I like to just like I always look at Kenny. I don't know if you're familiar. He gives away free assets, 2D, 3D, you name it. And I'll sometimes just browse his site, just download stuff. And I think there's a lot of sprites on there that he's made that will get your gears turning, right? That might just
Yeah.
inspire you. And down the road, like you probably want to make your own art. It sounds like eventually, but you could always start with placeholders unless they muddy your vision or interfere with your vision or something.
Hmm.
But I think that's a good place to start before we get to actually using a game engine. It's nice to have a workshop full of free assets you can use. So that's probably a pretty good starting point. As that first, or sorry, ending point for that first chapter. You are a producer. We have notes for Scratch Your Itch, and I think it'd be exciting to get into that next time. Um, but in the meantime, there's exciting stuff for you to do, and Birdhouse. I'm really excited about that. What a cool concept.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited that you're excited about it because I feel like cool. I'm hearing from somebody who's made games, who's worked on games and stuff, and just to hear that, I'm like, okay, cool. So my concepts aren't bad at all. Like there's potential there and something that I can do. So that's cool.
Yeah.
But I did have like some kind of some questions here for
Mm-hmm.
you at least. And I think we've kind of gone over the first one where I was like, one of the big things you highlight at the very beginning is like, here's the goal as the producer, here's how, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the how you put, well, the goal is ship the game, right? You're getting the game out there.
That's right.
But then the how, you said like gather the concepts, tools, software, and assets. And so I was kind of like, oh, is I wanted a little bit of clarity on the concepts, but it sounds like it's the ideas for the game, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I can maybe change the wording there, but it's like a gather. It's more like create your concepts, I guess. But it's like the wording is hard because I've seen some people do this where they'll go to like a random generator page that just puts random words together, and that's sometimes how they will get inspiration or even rolling dice or something, right? Like I think you and I just happen to be the kind of people who are overflowing with ideas, right?
Hmm.
Like I've got no fewer than 3 game ideas I want to work on right now. It sounds like you do as well. And I know some other people, they have all the fire and energy and maybe even the know-how, but they for some reason the ideas don't come to them, or the ideas that do
Yeah.
come to them they're not thrilled about and they don't want to hit really hard. Um so I guess that's why I say gather the concepts, is because to me, I kind of see the concept as another asset, right? You could almost see it as something you could switch out. Like you could switch out a sprite, change your bird sprite. You could switch your uh, perspective. I'm going to go from 2D to 3D. And you can also switch out your concept. And a lot of times, whether you're making Birdhouse or, you might get a third of the way into the development and you just switch it up and now it's a bullet hell. And I mean, honestly, engine wise, it's a lot of the same things. You've got your environment, you've got some entities in the world, and they move around and they can spawn entities. That's all the things that you need for either Birdhouse, a cozy, village bird simulator type thing, or a bullet hell, right? And
Hmm.
so that's one of the reasons I think of the concept as like a almost just like a piece of data. I know some people get really attached to their concepts and it's dear to them, but it really is something that you can swap out. That's why I think about it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds like you're covered there. It sounds like you've got
Cool.
a cool concept for Birdhouse. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then I wanted to ask you too, like, what hats do you feel you wear the most when
Oh, great
working on a
question.
game?
So I would say for me, it's definitely programming. And
Mm.
I mean, games are software. That's all they really are, right? I mean, unless you're talking about a board game or something. But um, when you look at the expensive parts of my games, it's always the code. And it's also like when you look at my career, I've been paid far, far more to program than I have to do anything else. And I have lots of skills and I wear lots of hats and stuff, but like programming is the career that I've had, right? And I
Hmm.
think for that reason, like I have a tendency to over engineer and I fight against that. I've kind of done it my whole entire career. Um, but it's like it's also, I know it's my most marketable skill and my most valuable skill. So I feel like the time I spend programming, I'm creating the most value for my company. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like I'm just aware that when I'm making art, I'm not killing it as much as someone else with 20 years of art experiences. But when I'm programming, I am kind of killing it. I'm creating really good stuff. But that might not be the same for you, right? Because not having that programming experience, it might be something that you find that you like. It might be something you find that you don't like. Um, and I think it's not to say that like I have to be spending all my time in the code. I think it's more that I do because of my particular background and preferences, even, right? Like
Hmm.
I'm kind of the person who's happiest when I've just got a terminal, and like the way that I use Unity, I use it as really just like an IDE sort of, where I just like it's almost like a compiler. Like I don't heavily use the Unity interface. I like to spend my time in the code editor because that's just who I am. Um,
Hmm.
so that would probably be different for you. The hat I wear the second most is probably content creation. If you look at the entire um, spread of the game, like the development over time, like my current game will probably take about a year or two to make, and
Hmm.
it'll be creating, like for you would be your birds. Like maybe you get to like 5 birds and you decide you need 50, and maybe you get to 50, you decide you need 200, and like, scope should always be trimmed down depending on the project. But, with a big game, the content creation, it takes a ton of time. And, what I've done with my content pipeline is as I was saying earlier, I try to trim it down, and like, I will make brutal cuts. I will cut frames of animation. I will be like, I am not animating this chicken, period. You know what I mean? I will just make those calls. And even despite that, I still end up spending a ton of my time, um, working on the content. After
Hmm.
that is probably debugging, I would guess, just fixing my bugs and play testing. And then art, which would be higher on the list if I hadn't made those decisions that I had early on, right? Like to not animate, and also like my art pipeline is very lean and mean because I have not really changed my art style in like 5 or 10 years. I use the same palette, I use the same brush, I crank out art, right? And it's not that there's not tons of art in my game. It's that when I work on the art, it happens very quickly.
Yeah.
But that's just my experience. Yeah, that's probably where I spend so the bulk of my time, the lion's share programming, and then the other things is just creating the game, right?
Hmm. Yeah. That's awesome.
But that might be different
Uh,
for you.
yeah, and I guess this one's a very like manufacturing heavy term here, but how do you
Hmm.
build a bill of materials? So my last job was in manufacturing. I was a writer for a place, but I was one thing that always would come by is like they'd call it a BOM. They just BOM, bill of
Mm,
materials, a
mm.
BOM. And it was basically every single thing that went into any product they made, like
Oh wow.
down to the screws and everything, like how
Mm.
many and that sort of thing, all the parts. And so, like, I guess as you're making the game, how do you, I guess, is there like a need to be aware of all of those things that come together into it?
Yeah, I think that there is. You should be aware of like the size of your bomb, right? But I think it's probably naive. Maybe some people develop this way, but like to think that you could have your entire game planned out, um, you've really got to be threading a needle there. That's a tough skill. What you could do is like I talk a lot about scope in some of my educational content, and I talk about laying like sketching stuff out, laying it down, and I also talk about how much content you'll need, right? And one of my rules of thumb is 7 ± 2, which is kind of what the human brain is comfortable keeping in its short-term memory, like a phone number length, like if you get a
Hmm.
phone number at a bar or something, like you can usually remember that. But if they gave you like a credit card number or a 30 digit, you'd be like, I don't have it. Um,
Yeah.
and so for that reason, you could do this. You could lay down your game on graph paper or something and be like, all right, it's going to be one house. It's going to be a fenced in yard. It's going to start with 3 trees and 5 birds and 3 tools, and that's the
Hmm.
game. And you could lay all that down on graph paper. The problem is, as you make the game, you'll be learning a lot, and the game, like graph paper, is not a game, right? A vision is not a game. Even if you play tested your game with paper, it's still not a video game. It's close. It's the best you can do, and it's way cheaper than coding all of that up and stuff. But it's impossible unless you're very closely cloning another game or something, which, some people do to great success. That's just not how I like to roll. But it's
Hmm.
just so hard to know for sure until like to bullseye. Like, here's the content I'm going to need. That's it.
Yeah.
Because the game creation content process, from my experience, is so chaotic. Like I think it's important to have in mind your bomb. Like it's probably really beneficial for you to have one. Like, here's what I think my game will need, like a manifest. But my best guess for you is by the time you get to the end, your manifest will look quite different.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great thing to have, and probably a useful practice for you to spell out. But don't be disappointed or surprised if your end goal is quite different from
Hmm.
your initial guess there.
Yeah.
Great question.
Awesome. And then I guess I feel like we covered the last one of just like what you felt was needed for Birdhouse. I think you covered that really well as far
Oh,
as
great.
like the resources and stuff earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get to scratch your itch and the video game building blocks, and we'll get to your boss picking your game engine, and because that's a pretty important part for needed. You got to have a game engine to make your game Birdhouse. But everything else, it sounds like you're well prepared for with experience in art and music. I'm excited to hear what kind of music you make.
Yeah. I mean, while we were having this, I was literally like, okay, what kind of instruments do I want to use with like birds and stuff? And I'm thinking maybe there's going to be a lot of whistles because birds have like a very
Ooh.
chirpy type of, I don't know, just thinking of like the creature itself and like what types of instruments and sounds would go well with that type of soundtrack. So,
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I
yeah,
could
I'm
picture
like,
those with the drumsticks, the ones that are kind of more brushy,
oh
almost
yeah,
like
the brush
feathers.
drumsticks.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
could picture that to kind of get that kind of tactile, like bird wing feel, like feathers almost or something,
Yeah.
kind of organic feel. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's exciting.
Yeah, and I'll have to get another acoustic guitar. I've been meaning to for a while, but I also
Mm.
have a friend who plays a lot of different great instruments too that I think would work with that, like violin and stuff. So
Oh, that sounds awesome. Yeah, you can't really beat real instruments. That's genuinely that's a hook that'll make your game stick out. People will be like, "Oh, like you would have number of people would come flock to your game, right?" Once
yeah.
they found like that would be the thing for them. They're like, "Oh, you look pretty cool." And then I found out, wow, they made all the music, with real instruments. Like I'm sold, right?
So yeah, there's always ideas popping in where I'm like, all right, what captures? And I think that really comes from like, we mentioned a little bit early on how I did an Animal Crossing podcast for a long time, and my goal
Mm-hmm.
with that was always to like capture the like essence of Animal Crossing as closely as possible, where it's like it's a real-time game, you check in like kind of daily and stuff. And I was like, all right, so the podcast is weekly, we're like a weekly
Mm.
event in game kind of thing, but also capturing like the calm kind of atmosphere for that game, and I don't know, just little things. So I feel like I like to build around those types of concepts and make them make them something that's felt to the audience.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love going after a feeling instead of like something cold and brittle, like a number or
Hmm.
something. And I love that your game is like because you have so much experience with Animal Crossing. Your game is almost like just a little slice of Animal Crossing. And I love that because, I think a lot of people will be like, I want to make Animal Crossing, but bigger and better. It's
Yeah,
like, oh, you're going to have such a hard time. But your
it's
idea
already
is,
huge.
yeah, yeah, it's already going to take you years, but you've got this like, little narrow piece of it, which
Hmm.
I think is great because you've got so much experience with it. And, you know, you can just
Yeah.
distill that down.
Yeah, and there's definitely like, a big Animal Crossing influence there, but I think there's also a Viva Pinata influence. I don't know if you played
Mm,
that game too much,
mm-hmm.
where
PlayStation, right?
yeah, I think it's Xbox, Rare after
Oh,
they had
okay, right.
gotten acquired by Xbox made that. But a lot of the concepts there are like what will exist with this game, where it's like you get a garden in that game, you plant different crops and stuff to attract specific piñatas and that sort of thing. So I'm like, oh yeah, they've kind of like built that out in some way already. But
Love that.
everything's got its own little twist, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Something else I talk about is cutting close to the grain. And I think it's totally okay to borrow concepts and layouts and ideas and game flows from other games, especially, let's see, Viva Pinata looks like 2006. So that's old enough,
Yeah.
right? There's like if there hasn't been a game like that in a while, like that's how Stardew Valley got so successful. There was a hunger for Harvest Moon, so maybe you can
hmm
tap into that Viva
it's been
Pinata
a little
hunger.
while.
It's been a minute, so yeah, well, that's very exciting. I can't wait to see where your game concept goes.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to get to work on it.
All right,
This
this was fun.
Yeah, this is cool. I think it'll be awesome for people to kind of see somebody go through the process of following it all.
Thanks for listening. You can follow ChuyPlays on Twitter and YouTube. Hey, if you want to support Make the Game, here are some ways. Number 1, buy my book, How to Make a Video Game All by Yourself. Number 2, this really helps out. Write a 5-star review on Amazon. While you're there, check out the Make the Game wish list. And lastly, write a positive review for the show, Make the Game, on your favorite podcasting platform. You are being played out by Funshine, which you are free to use in your own projects. Now it's time for you to go make the game. I probably will record the intro and stuff later just to clean it up because it's hard to like be perfect and just go, like
hmm
you have tons of podcast experience. You probably know all this stuff.
I write it down and read it every time. Like I have to
Yeah,
have it written.
yeah.
I put my podcast voice on. I'm like, all right, here's the
Mm.
cadence of how I speak all this. I'm like, welcome to Haken, an Animal Crossing podcast, your podcast dedicated to all things Animal Crossing.
Oh, I love it. That's very well practiced.
Done
Well
it
said.
for years now.
Yeah, I got that when I was making the trailer for my book. How to make a video game all by yourself. Like it's you start to get that like that cadence, like that flow out of it.